Hey, test, 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 test. Okay. Ba-ba-ba. Sorry about that. I just had to change it over to my AirPods. So hopefully you guys can hear me now. Happy Good Friday. This is, of course, a huge week for a number of reasons. It's one of the holiest weeks in Western culture. Holy Week beginning with Sunday, Palm Sunday, this last Sunday where Jesus entered Jerusalem during the last week of his ministry. And of course, today is Good Friday, where Jesus ate the Last Supper with his disciples and then was ultimately crucified tonight. And then Sunday, Easter, where we have Resurrection Day. So a really big week. And some of you may not be familiar with the story. I'm sure you've heard it, but the Holy Week story is in all four Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all cover the Holy Week, beginning with Palm Sunday and going all the way through to Easter. And so I thought I'd just read a little bit from Luke's Gospel about the Last Supper, and if this is the first time you're hearing it, hopefully this speaks to your heart. Um, and if it brings up questions, feel free to find me on Twitter and ask me whatever questions you may have. Um, I've been a Christian since I was about, committed Christian, I would say, since I was about 22, 23 years old. I was baptized when I was 24. So it's been about 20 years almost for me. And I was open to the idea before that as well, but it was one of the most life-changing events of my life. It really completely turned my world upside down at that age. And it's been pretty amazing, and I haven't looked back since. Of course, there's been, uh, you know, tough times that I've gone through in my spiritual journey, just like anybody. But uh, yeah, without further ado, I'll read from Luke 22, starting in verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." "Where do you want us to prepare for it?" they asked. He replied, "As you enter the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him to the house where he enters, and say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, all furnished. Make preparations there." They left and found things just as Jesus had told them, so they prepared the Passover. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God." After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with me on the table. The Son of Man will go as it has been decreed, but woe to that man who betrays him." They began to question among themselves which of them who would do this. A dispute arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. Jesus said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors. But you are not like but you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should become like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stood by me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom, just as my Father conferred one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith will not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. But he replied, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death." And Jesus answered, "I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me." Then Jesus asked them, When I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Nothing, they answered. He said to them, But now, if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. It is written, And he was numbered with the transgressors. And I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. The disciples said, See, Lord, here are two swords. That's enough, he replied. Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, Pray that you will not fall into temptation. He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down, and prayed, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and went back to his disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. Why are you sleeping? He asked them. Get up and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? All right, so that covers the Last Supper and a brief synopsis of the prayers at Gethsemane before he was betrayed. So that's what today is about, Good Friday, and this amazing story as a film back in I think the late 1950s or early 1960s. The title was The Greatest Story Ever Told. We are people who are captured by story. Jordan Peterson makes this claim. He has a whole book on maps of meaning. This is his early work in which he talks about narrative truth and about how there's these very, very old stories that really speak to the human condition and allow us to access truth in ways that other disciplines don't. So we are meaning-making people. We string narratives through data points to understand things. This story, the greatest story ever told, about the Passion of Christ, and you may remember that movie from early 2000s, is about a God who comes down and enters into the suffering world with us, ultimately to pay the ultimate sacrifice, the death at the cross, at the hands of enemies, and he prays, Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, while he's on the cross. So it's a very powerful story. On the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, he talks about loving your enemies and praying for those who persecute you. That's a really hard ethic if you've ever tried to practice that. But that's the story, that Christ came and died for us, for our sins, to reconcile us with God and to impart righteousness on us. And after the resurrection, we are righteous before God. And that's the good news, that we are righteous. And it's not something that we earn through our actions, through what we do. It's something that God did for us. And as long as we remember that and meditate on that, we are walking through life in a Christian way. So thought I'd start with that. Good Friday. It is good. It is good. It's Good Friday. And for those skeptics out there who may not be familiar with the Bible, as I used to not be before my world was turned upside down, this account is in all four Gospels. Why are there four? Why are there deviations between the different Gospels or little subtle differences? So I want to speak to that because if you read the Passion narrative, or if you read Holy Week in each of the Gospels, there'd be slightly different emphasis. Some stories will be very similar. There's other stories that aren't included in other places. And so why all this disparity? Are they in conflict? And I would just say that if you get any witnesses together, even just friends, if you want to recreate an evening together amongst friends where you're out publicly, what you'll find is that there's different emphasis from all your friends on different events from the evening, and their version of events is going to be slightly different. And sometimes you will remember the same event differently. If you're married, that's certainly true, where you remember the events of something differently than your spouse. Not that that's ever happened to anyone in the history of mankind, but you get the point. So if that's the case, then wouldn't this lend more weight to the authority and the the accounts in the Bible. Just throwing that out there. I think that the fact that we have 4 gospel accounts of this passion narrative at the end of Christ's ministry is very positive, um, very positive evidence for the validity of those stories. But I would like to move on now. So again, if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out and tweet me or make a comment on this video. I'm happy to look at that as I'm able. All right, going back to COVID. So the other reason it's a huge week is because supposedly today, according to CNN, will be the COVID peak of deaths. If that's true, that's very strange that it happens on Good Friday. Coincidence? I don't know. But so we might peak in COVID deaths today, and we'll see how that pans out. That's according to CNN. But the good news is in New York City, which is indeed the epicenter of this whole issue. The results from yesterday are very, very good. As of yesterday, there were only 82 reported cases, new cases, and 35 deaths as of yesterday. Now, for context, again, this is off the New York City health page. So for context, the day prior there was 1,161 new cases. So we went from 1,161 new cases on Wednesday to 82 yesterday. And on deaths, we went from 221 on Wednesday to 35 deaths yesterday. That is some positive news. I think that's very, very good news. So that's New York City. Now, New York State still kind of in that ramping up their bell curve. And according to the New York Times, there's a breakdown of the different states and the different cases. And if you look at the overall U.S. death rate, and this is the number of active cases as a denominator and the number of deaths as a numerator, we're about 3.7% nationwide. For the world is a little bit higher. If you take the world number of cases as a denominator and the number of world deaths, it's somewhere around just under 6%, I believe. So what's interesting, though, is if you actually go into the different cases, different states, caseloads, then you'll find that death rate varies all the way down to about 1.3% at the lowest, and that's here in Hawaii, where I am. That's South Dakota, where my wife's from. That's other places as well. So we are seeing a very big disparity between the death rates in different states. So why is that? Why would we have this big disparity of death rates? Could it be, it's probably several reasons, but a couple that come to mind would be maybe we don't have a full accounting of how many people have been exposed, certainly in New York State. So in New York City, so maybe there's a lot more exposed there than have been tested, and therefore that would bring down that 3.7 number nationwide down a little bit further with more testing. It could be that the location where we've had the hotspots, Louisiana, New York, Detroit, upcoming, is the people there might be more people there in close proximity to each other that have prior existing conditions, so they might be more susceptible to complications from COVID-19. So anyway, there's a bunch of different reasons for that disparity. But bottom line is that numerator and the denominator are still fuzzy. We're still trying to figure those numerator and denominators out. Now, what's interesting is that the Washington University model has still kept their scaled down number of deaths to just over 61,000 deaths. And that's scaled down again from 93,000 1 week ago. And so a big debate has entered in the media about why that is. Is it because we're really good at social distancing and we've brought down the number? So good job, attaboy, Americans. Or is it that the models were just flawed from the beginning? And I think the answer is we'll really never fully know. But Jonah Goldberg over at National Review, he reflects that he believes it's probably both. We've done well in social distancing. We had to make some assumptions with social distancing, and the model going into the model with the 93,000 deaths a week ago was assuming social distancing, full social distancing through the end of May. So with real numbers plugged back into the model over the last week, we have dropped by a third the number of expected deaths, which is great news. Great news. This is also the first time we've had this global pandemic where, with the internet and the way information travels, we've had a bursting of human knowledge and human ingenuity to tackle this problem. And the National Review also reports that there are currently 104 different treatments in the works for COVID-19. 104 different treatments for COVID-19. That's astounding. Imagine that happening in 1918 when we had the Spanish flu come through. It would be impossible. Maybe a dozen, but 104 around the world. And this is not including seeking a vaccine for COVID-19. So that's pretty remarkable. I think that the way the world has responded to this crisis and the way that each individual nation has responded is going to produce some really interesting lessons learned in our information age of how we approach these complicated problems and how we crowdsource information, how we crowdsource scientific knowledge and problem solving from the scientific community. It's pretty remarkable. The websites that went up, the apps that went up to collaborate across different disciplines, epidemiologists around the world. Of course, the studies in Great Britain, the studies at the University of Washington, Johns Hopkins studies, all these different areas coming together, combining minds, working around the clock to try to really tackle this issue and defeat it. It's amazing. It's really amazing. We are watching in real time, harnessing human ingenuity to tackle a very complicated, life-threatening problem, global problem. 100,000, I think 100,000 deaths we've just surpassed globally. So think of that, 100,000 deaths. That's high. That's really high. And we're not done. So wars, we're getting into war territory internationally, and of course, in our case, we're somewhere in the high teens in terms of number of deaths. So if we could keep it to 61,000, and I hesitate to use keep it to that, but that's about right around what we lost to the Vietnam War in terms of American casualties. So that's not that those comparisons help necessarily, but in some cases they do. So anyway, today should be the peak. That's according to CNN. And what's interesting, so now we're talking about the next steps. The stock market was doing okay this past week. The Trump administration announced that he's forming a task force to look at reopening the economy. And of course, the big debate is this too soon? Do we need to stay on lockdown for longer? Different states have made slightly different judgment calls in that regard. And now there's some concern that the states, in the absence of federal guidance, they're just going to make their own decisions based on the information they have at hand, which makes sense. I mean, maybe that is the better way to go. In Europe, Vox News is reporting that 3 countries are considering lifting restrictions very, very soon. That would be Austria, Denmark, and the Czech Republic. Even Spain and Italy are considering to loosen some of their restrictions in the face of their tremendous death rate. And so what we're seeing in Europe is that each country is trying to figure out what's best for them to get their economies going again, to protect their people with social distancing and the unique circumstances to each of them. And you can see from what I started with the different state caseloads that might apply also in our case. So South Dakota, Hawaii, with very, very low, 1.3% death rates presently, maybe can make slightly different decisions than, say, New York City, New York, or Louisiana in terms of getting back to work. So I think that that's a good idea to do this task force. I hope that the task force for reopening the economy will engage with each state. I would expect that they would, and try to figure out the best time to open up the economy for people to get back to work. Um, so we'll see. I mean, we got 3 days till Easter. Let's see what Easter brings. Let's see what Monday brings in terms of this pandemic, and see where we're at over the next few days. So, two other things I want to talk about briefly, and if anybody has any comments, feel free to shout them out. But Fox News reporting that so COVID has been in the news so much, and of course is capturing everybody's imagination and dominating the news cycle. But there are other things that are happening behind the scenes. For example, Adam Schiff and the Democrats in Congress are going to put together some sort of commission and investigation into the handling of COVID-19 with the administration. So it's going to be 9/11 commission just for this current thing. So on the one side, trying to figure out what Trump knew prior, how he fumbled this whole preparation thing, and on the other side, you know, same old story. Another way to try to take down the current administration. So that's what's happening. You may or may not have heard about that, but also there's been a lot of a lot of stuff released with Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, regarding investigating the FBI's conduct over the last three years. And what's amazing is that just today in Fox News, they released a piece by Greg Ray, I'm not sure how to say his last name, titled "The FBI had information Steele Dossier was part of, quote, a Russian disinformation campaign, declassified footnotes show." So this is the Inspector General's report. There's declassified footnotes from FBI files that suggest that they had information the Steele Dossier was part of a Russian disinformation campaign. And as you know, the Steele Dossier was the primary reason for getting a lot of the FISA warrants to tap some of the Trump administration or the Trump campaign prior to the election, and then continue those surveillance efforts after the election. So I'll just read a little bit of this. The FBI's Crossfire Hurricane team investigating the Trump 2016 campaign received multiple indications that former British spy Christopher Steele, one of their key informants in their investigation, was part of an elaborate Russian disinformation campaign, according to several newly declassified footnotes from the Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz's report on FBI misconduct. It's ironic that Russian collusion narrative was fatally flawed because of Russian disinformation, Senators Chuck Grassley of Iowa and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who had pushed for the declassification, said in a statement to Fox News on Friday. These footnotes confirmed that there was a direct Russian disinformation campaign in 2016, and there were ties between Russian intelligence and a presidential campaign, the Clinton campaign, not Trump's. At the same time, Grassley's office added that the senators expect a fuller declassification in the coming days, including a version of the footnotes that does not redact the names of those who raised the alarm about Steele. One of the footnotes, which was previously redacted in its entirety, read, "The redacted stated that it did not have high confidence in this subset of Steele's reporting and assessed that the referenced subset was part of a Russian disinformation campaign to denigrate U.S. foreign relations," end quote. That subset referred to the activities of former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen, whom Steele's dossier claimed had traveled to Prague to meet with Russian agents. Special counsel Robert Mueller was unable to substantiate that claim, and Cohen has denied it. So this is quite interesting that it's back and forth. Now, this does get complicated for the average person, and so chances are you will latch on to information to confirm your prior assumptions. So if you think that Trump was bought and paid for by Putin, then you're going to just latch on to whatever tidbit of information confirms that narrative in your brain. And likewise, if you think that this is all a Clinton conspiracy to get Trump through the Steele dossier, then you're going to latch on to each data point to confirm that narrative. Now, I don't think both narratives can be completely true. So one is going to be more true than the other. And this article, to me, and the declassification of the FBI's footnotes from back in that day suggests that one narrative might be a little bit more true than the other. And certainly we've been through a whole impeachment. We've been through a Mueller report regarding Russian interference, Ukrainian interference, all these foreign interference. And really what it comes back to each time is the Steele Dossier, which ties back to the Clinton administration or the Clinton campaign. So that's pretty interesting. That's on Fox News. You can go look at that. And then there's this Vox article that talks about why Bernie Sanders failed, and it talks about him trying to form a coalition of young people around Medicare for all and more, an increase in social welfare programs, and that would lead to a huge turnout in the young population to ultimately nominate Bernie Sanders. So that was the philosophy from the beginning. That's what this Vox article talks about, and it's this piece by Zach Beauchamp, and it's a pretty good piece, and he analyzes the socialistic policies around the campaign. And he basically came out and said it on February 2nd that when we bring millions of working people, people of color, and young people in the political process, there's nothing we cannot accomplish. So that was the philosophy, and Sanders said it himself on a number of occasions. But the critique was that the turnout among young voters wasn't going to support his nomination. That was detected pretty early on, and it's certainly Super Tuesday when Biden walked away with a bunch of major wins. The young people did not turn out for Sanders, and so that's interesting. So I want to just like hone in on this young people being drawn to this socialist, more socialist agenda, and the same young people having lower voter turnout. So what's missing is why. And I just want to kind of imagine for a while why you would have young people who would be very emotionally charged, presumably on this agenda, this socialistic agenda, and yet not show up when it matters most. So let's brainstorm together why that might be. Okay, I'm just going to throw some ideas out there. I'm not saying that any of these are accurate. I can't read anybody's minds. I'm just offering some plausible explanations for why, again, younger voters did not turn out to support Bernie Sanders' campaign in the primaries. So let's say number one, they're busy. They're young. They've got a lot going on. They have, their social lives. They've got maybe high pressure jobs, and it slips their mind to try to exit their day and on a Tuesday to get out there and support Bernie with a vote. So they're busy. That's one explanation. What's another explanation? They don't think their vote's going to count. They think that it doesn't matter if they show up and vote because really the system's going to get Bernie anyway. So maybe a resignation attitude amongst the voters. That's possible. I'm sure there's some who might fit into that category. What are some other reasons why young people would not turn out for Bernie Sanders at the polling or at the primaries if they're the most motivated by this message? So I'm trying to hold these things in tension. If they're the most motivated, the most passionate, the most emotional, the most active in that cause, then why drop off when the cause matters most? And the only thing I can really think of as a plausible explanation is maybe they're not entirely sure that they're right. Maybe they're not completely persuaded that this cause, this socialistic cause, and this agenda is the right pursuit. Maybe they're cautious enough to know that there's opposition to those policies, and they're not sure if the opposition might have a point. And maybe they've investigated the counterclaims against the agenda. Maybe they haven't, but maybe they're just not sure about that agenda, and therefore they're a little bit more hesitant. So we have busy, we have resignation, and we have hesitancy with the agenda. So those are possible explanations of why the young voters don't turn out. It could be the case that it's a subtle form of rejection of that agenda, even among younger voters. Maybe even though Bernie supporters tend to be younger, maybe there's not enough young people, motivated young people, to actually get out. Maybe other young people don't see the same agenda as being the future of America. So it could be that the demographics are a little bit misleading about the coalition that Bernie was organizing around. So those are some ideas. He certainly did dig into the Democratic agenda and get a lot of his points out there. I forgot I wanted to talk about this other thing from yesterday. So I just want to pull up my notes, and I'll have to go back and find it. Let's see. So I deleted I didn't delete it, I just took it out of my tab, the article. Okay. So John Hirschauer, I hope I'm saying that right, had a piece yesterday in the National Review called "Joe Biden and the End of Tolerance," and it's a really great piece because, for a while I've had a problem with the political agenda of the left, and what I mean by that is there's a huge incentive by the left to force down acceptance of different viewpoints. So this all started with what I would say is the gay rights movement, and particularly gay marriage. So it wasn't enough that we had civil unions. It wasn't enough that there was legal transparency in two people of the same gender wanting to spend their lives together. There was an equivalent outcome through different terms like civil union, vice marriage, but that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough for the movement. The movement had to be called marriage. And the reason for that is because that starts to creep into people's thinking about the normalcy or the acceptance of that term. So it moved past, in my view, when that happened, it moved past tolerance, which is, hey, we have different ideas about how best to enjoy human flourishing. We have different religious and cultural things we bring to the table for different lifestyle choices and different behavior choices, and that's okay. I'm not going to force you to believe what I think, and I would appreciate if you don't force me to believe what you think, and we can live at peace and be friendly with each other. And I remember having a debate probably 15 years ago with a Marine who I knew and my brother knew. I didn't know this at the time. He's gay and he's married to a man today. And the debate was around gay marriage. And at the time, this is a long time ago before it became the law of the land, but civil unions were proposed by the Bush administration. And his position at that time was that the government should get out of marriage businesses altogether, and they should just call everything a union and take away the term marriage. And I understood that point of view. If you want to be, if you want to have a truly tolerant society, you just have a government recognition, and then the term marriage can be defined by the different faith groups or different community groups as they see fit. So that's not the way we went. Obviously, we went to gay marriage, and to me, that crossed over that tolerance versus acceptance. And what this piece talks about is, I use the word acceptance, and acceptance meaning that you have to basically celebrate this difference between different points of view, as opposed to tolerance. And I think that's dangerous, because that starts to get into a little bit of mind control. Like, if you're not thinking the right way, we will make sure you do. And this piece refers to it. I used acceptance, but he uses a different term called blind affirmation. Blind affirmation. So I'm going to read you a little bit of this piece, and I'll discuss with you why I think this is a relevant piece in our time and day. Okay, so this is talking about Biden's proposal for LGBTQ plus issues. So a third prong of the Biden proposal suggests enacting measures to change underlying attitudes about LGBTQ plus issues through public information campaigns. What these campaigns will look like in practice needs explicit definition. Will the federal government spend taxpayer dollars on a public information campaign to remind the masses that not all men have penises? Little tongue in cheek there. This is left to our imagination, and it is not hard to imagine a public information campaign directed at insubordinate churches that cling bitterly to their Bibles and maintain fealty to their bimillennial faith dogmas on human sexuality. The latter is not much of a stretch when one considers that Joe Biden, or the handlers who drafted his proposal, thinks the legitimacy of those moral commitments. Biden also pledges to reverse religious freedom carve-outs pursued by the Trump administration to ensure, quote, that no one is turned away from a business or refused service by a government official just because of who they are or who they love, end quote. Jack Phillips of Masterpiece Cake Shop and others who actually believe their faiths to be true and not mere lifestyle accoutrements to be brandished when fashionable figured to be excluded from the regime of equality pursued by the Biden administration. What's most unclear from Biden's proposal is its purpose. He does not spell out in precise language how the various interest groups in the community in question have yet to attain equality. His plan is ostensibly meant to help them achieve. The only thing that is clear is that tolerance, in the traditional understanding of the word, is not the plan's principal aim. In Biden's defense, America has not been interested in tolerance since the decline of cultural Christianity began in earnest in the twilight of the Second World War. Tolerance, as John Gray wrote in 1992, bears the implication of judgment. To tolerate something is to cast judgment upon it. If society tolerates a given behavior or belief, it acknowledges the existence of a moral standard from which the behavior or belief in question deviates. If there are no normative standards, then there is nothing to tolerate, only differences to celebrate. Under the old regime of tolerance, such as it was, one could acknowledge that a given behavior or belief was vicious, but join the philosopher in recognizing that human laws do not forbid all vices. We are all sinners, and while your vice may not be mine, we both are vicious and depraved. No longer, there is no depravity, no category of vices which we might choose to tolerate. In the post-tolerance regime of blind affirmation, the only forbidden vice is the recognition of vice as such. In a post-Christian society, a post-religious society in truth, such moral confusion is understandable. If the Gospels are stories concocted by first-century Jews who had a hallucinatory experience after the death of their cult leader, the moral commands that the New Testament contains are at best quaint suggestions. At worst, they are retrograde and capricious fables with nothing to teach a modern and enlightened people. In neither case are its commands binding, at least in the same way they are to a people who believe them to be actually, not metaphorically or accidentally, true. If there is no God, then there is no natural law, no preordained moral order whose dictates we can divine from the observable world. If we inhabit a universe of ungoverned chaos where truth and falsehood are matters of private opinion, Joe Biden's reluctance to comport himself as though the Catholic faith he professes were true, indeed as though there were any objective moral standards at all, should not surprise us. So his conclusion is that this is kind of an unsurprising outcome of the abandonment of a moral framework, objective moral reality, an objective moral truth, if you like, where as postmodernism has made us more and more accounting of different interpretations of the world and different interpretations of morality and ethics, it's confused things more so. There's no anchor point at this point that Western culture used to have pre-World War II, according to this author. And so I think that this is an overstep. This is about making you think the right way, as defined by the government, by the use of force, and the force being laws and presumably fines or coming in force and shutting down businesses or shutting down, God forbid, religious institutions in the future. This is dangerous territory. I don't like to see this future. And it's frustrating to me that the left doesn't understand our objection to it. The objection is this is moving past tolerance and into, what did he call it? Blind affirmation. Blind affirmation. Because I disagree with something that somebody else decides to do does not mean I can't live in the same society with them. It doesn't mean I can't be neighbors with them. It doesn't mean I can't still love them. The Christian ethic is that we are to show Christ's love to everybody, regardless of whether they're our best friends or our worst enemies. And that ethic is transformative in a culture. It's transformative in a people. And we need to hold on to that ethic. And that ethic is best understood, I think, with tolerance, not blind affirmation. So that's what I wanted to talk about. I hope you found that valuable. I hope you guys have a great Good Friday and a great Easter weekend. And if you learned something, I'm glad. If you didn't, and you think I'm full of you know what, that's okay. Tell me where I'm wrong. I like to respond to comments and what people's thoughts are. Go ahead and direct message me on Twitter, or tweet at me any kind of articles or anything like that that you think might be pertinent to the discussion. And I'm happy to pull that into future episodes of JVB Live. Take care, guys. See you later.